A millionaire hires a humble young woman for one night. She needed money to help her sick mother. The man welcomes her into his luxurious penthouse, and a desperate dilemma arises. The young woman must make a decision that will change their future forever. Before listening to this emotional story, remember to subscribe to the channel. The shrill sound of the alarm clock broke the silence of the small apartment. Sarah opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of fatigue that had accumulated for months. She looked at the clock. 5:30 a.m. Another day of struggle was about to begin. With a sigh, she got up and walked to the bathroom. As she got ready, her reflection in the mirror told a story of sleepless nights and constant worries. At 28, Sarah carried on her shoulders a responsibility that seemed too big to bear. She left the apartment in a hurry, descending the stairs of the simple building where she lived. The sky was still dark when she reached the street, mounting her worn-out motorcycle. The first job of the day awaited her, a few hours as a nursing assistant at a local clinic. During the journey, her thoughts wandered to her mother, Mrs. Barbara. For months, she had been fighting a serious illness that required expensive and complex treatment. Hospital bills were piling up, and Sarah could barely keep up with basic expenses, even working 2 jobs. Arriving at the clinic, Sarah immersed herself in her routine. She cared for patients with dedication, but her mind was distant, calculating expenses and seeking impossible solutions for her financial situation. When her shift ended, she barely had time to rest before heading to her second job as a waitress at a restaurant in the city center. The day dragged on, and Sarah felt the weight of fatigue in every movement. Serving tables, she observed the well-dressed clients, their carefree conversations about business and leisure. A world so distant from hers, where every penny was counted and every hour of work was precious. It was then that something unusual happened. While serving a particularly lively table, Sarah bumped into a passing man, dropping the tray full of drinks. The liquid splashed, staining the man's impeccable suit. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Sarah exclaimed, mortified. Her hands trembled as she tried to clean up the mess with a napkin. The man, who must have been around 40, looked at her with a surprisingly calm expression. "Don't worry," he said, his voice deep and controlled. "Accidents happen." Sarah expected an irritated reaction, perhaps even a complaint to the manager. But the man just smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was something about him that intrigued her, a mixture of power and loneliness that she couldn't explain. "Let me help clean this up," he offered, grabbing some napkins. "No, please, sir. It's my responsibility," Sarah insisted, embarrassed. The man observed her for a moment, as if really seeing her for the first time. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she answered hesitantly. "Sarah," he repeated, as if testing the name. "I'm Michael Thompson." The name sounded familiar to Sarah, but she couldn't remember from where. Michael took a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "If you ever need help, don't hesitate to call me," he said, in a tone that Sarah couldn't decipher. Was it an offer of help or something more? Before she could respond, Michael walked away, leaving Sarah confused and intrigued. Looking at the card in her hands, she saw the name Michael Thompson printed in golden letters, followed by CEO Thompson Enterprises. The rest of the shift passed like a blur. Sarah couldn't get the encounter out of her head. Why would such a powerful man offer help to a simple waitress? There was something in his eyes, a mixture of kindness and sadness, that disturbed her. Arriving home late at night, Sarah found her neighbor, Mrs. Martha, waiting for her in the hallway. Sarah's heart sank. She knew this could only mean bad news. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Martha began, her voice trembling. "The hospital called. Your mother, she's gotten worse. They said you need to go there as soon as possible." Sarah's world seemed to crumble. Without thinking twice, she ran back to the street, mounted her motorcycle, and sped towards the hospital, tears blurring her vision. At the hospital, reality hit her like a punch. The doctor spoke about the need for an experimental treatment, the last hope for her mother. But the cost? It was astronomical, far beyond anything Sarah could dream of paying. Sitting beside her mother's bed, observing Mrs. Barbara's pale face and closed eyes, Sarah felt completely powerless. It was then that her fingers touched something in her pocket, the card that Michael Thompson had given her. Sarah stared fixedly at the card, the golden letters shimmering under the hospital's fluorescent light. An internal battle was waging in her mind. Could she really call a stranger asking for help? What might he want in return? But looking again at her mother, Sarah realized she had no choice. With trembling hands, she took out her cell phone and dialed the number on the card. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. Michael Thompson speaking. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. Mr. Thompson, this is Sarah, the waitress from the restaurant. I need help. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Michael responded. Sarah, I'm glad you called. Tell me, how can I help? The words came out in a desperate flow as Sarah explained her mother's situation, the hospital bills, the necessary treatment. When she finished, she was breathless and on the verge of tears. I see, said Michael, his voice calm and thoughtful. Sarah, would you like to meet me at my office tomorrow? I believe we can discuss a way to help your mother. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Yes, of course, thank you, Mr. Thompson. Great, my secretary will contact you to arrange the details, he replied. And Sarah, don't worry, we'll find a solution. When the call ended, Sarah looked at her sleeping mother, a thread of hope arising in her heart. She didn't know what Michael Thompson might offer or what he might want in return, but at that moment, any chance seemed better than none. As the night progressed, Sarah remained by her mother's side, her thoughts oscillating between hope and fear. Tomorrow's meeting with Michael Thompson could change everything, for better or worse. But one thing was certain, Sarah was ready to do anything to save her mother, no matter the cost. The first ray of sunlight entered through the hospital room window, marking the beginning of a new day, a day that Sarah felt would change the course of her life forever. Sarah's heart was racing as she observed the imposing building in front of her. Thompson Enterprises occupied a glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a world completely different from hers. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted the best dress she owned, a simple piece that seemed out of place in this environment, and entered the lobby. At the reception, an elegant woman greeted her with a rehearsed smile. Miss Sarah, Mr. Thompson is waiting for you. Please follow me. As they rode up in the panoramic elevator, Sarah felt her stomach churn. What could Michael Thompson want with her? How could he help her mother? And more importantly, what would he ask in return? The elevator doors opened directly into a luxurious anteroom. The secretary led her to a large carved wooden door. You can go in, she said with a gentle gesture. Sarah hesitated for a moment before turning the doorknob. The office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Michael Thompson was standing, looking at the urban landscape. Hearing the door, he turned around. Sarah, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, please have a seat. She settled into a leather armchair, feeling small and out of place. Michael sat behind his imposing mahogany desk. So, he began, tell me more about your mother's situation. Sarah took a deep breath and started to explain. She talked about the diagnosis, the treatments attempted, the astronomical hospital, bills. Her voice trembled slightly as she described the experimental treatment that was Mrs. Barbara's last hope. Michael listened attentively, his eyes fixed on her. When Sarah finished, he remained silent for a few moments, as if pondering something. I see, he said finally. And how much would this treatment cost? Sarah mentioned the sum, an amount that to her seemed impossible, but which made Michael slightly raise his eyebrows. Sarah, he said, leaning forward, I'm willing to help. Your mother. I can cover all medical expenses and ensure she receives the best possible treatment. Sarah's heart raced. It was more than she could have hoped for. But before she could express her gratitude, Michael raised his hand, silencing her. However, he continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I have a condition. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew there would be a price to pay. What condition? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael stood up, walking to the window. For a moment he remained silent, observing the city below. When he turned, his eyes had an intensity that made Sarah hold her breath. "I want you to spend a night with me," he said, his voice low and controlled. No restrictions. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She felt the blood drain from her face, her mind spinning with the implication of what he was proposing. I don't understand," she stammered, although she understood perfectly. Michael sat back down, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's simple, Sarah. One night with me and all your mother's medical expenses will be covered. The treatment, the recovery, everything. She will have the best care money can buy." Sarah felt nauseous. Part of her wanted to stand up and run out of that office, never to look back, but the image of her mother, fragile and sick in the hospital bed, kept her glued to the chair. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. "Why me?" A sad smile crossed Michael's face. "Because you intrigued me, Sarah. Your dedication, your strength, and there's something about you that fascinates me." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling tears forming. She thought of her mother, of the daily struggle against the disease. She thought of the bills piling up, of the exhaustion of working 2 jobs, and now this chance to solve everything. But at what cost? I need to think," she said finally, opening her eyes. Michael nodded. "Of course, I understand it's a difficult decision." He opened a drawer and took out an envelope. "Here's a detailed contract outlining the agreement. Take it with you, read it carefully. If you decide to accept, sign and return it to me." With trembling hands, Sarah took the envelope. She felt as if she were holding her own destiny. How long do I have to decide?" she asked. 3 days, Michael replied. "After that, the offer expires." Sarah stood up, her legs shaky. Before she could turn to leave, Michael spoke again. "Sarah, I know this may seem immoral, but think of it as a business deal. You give me something I want, I give you something you desperately need." She nodded mechanically, unable to form words. She left the office in a state of shock, barely registering the elevator ride back to the ground floor. On the busy city streets, Sarah walked aimlessly, the envelope weighing in her purse as if it were made of lead. Her mind was in turmoil, furiously debating Michael's proposal. Would she be capable of doing this, selling her body, her dignity to save her mother? The idea nauseated her, but at the same time, she couldn't stop thinking about the alternative. Seeing her mother wither away, knowing she could have done something to save her. Sarah found a bench in a nearby park and sat down, tears finally winning. She cried silently, feeling lost and alone. People passed by, oblivious to her dilemma, living their normal lives, while her world seemed to be crumbling. After a while, she dried her eyes and took the contract out of the envelope. The words seemed blurred through her tears, but the terms were clear. Michael offered full coverage for her mother's treatment, including the experimental procedure, in exchange for 1 night with Sarah. It was all there, cold and impersonal in legal language. Sarah folded the contract and put it back in her purse. She knew she needed to talk to someone, to vent, to seek advice. But with whom? Who could understand the depth of her dilemma? She decided to visit her mother in the hospital. Perhaps seeing Mrs. Barbara would help her make a decision. In the hospital room, Sarah held her mother's hand, observing the pale and tired face. Mrs. Barbara was sleeping, the effects of the medications evident in her serene expression. "Mom," Sarah whispered, "what do I do? How can I decide something like this?" There was no answer, just the constant beep of the monitors. Sarah felt a wave of love and despair. She would do anything to see her mother healthy again, to hear her laugh, to share more moments together. But this? Would it be too much? Hours passed, and Sarah remained by her mother's side, lost in thought. When night fell, she left the hospital, physically and emotionally exhausted. In her small apartment, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept tossing and turning in bed, Michael's contract a constant presence in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face, fragile and sick, contrasting with Michael's intense expression. The next morning, Sarah woke up after a restless night. She looked at the phone, thinking about calling Michael and refusing his offer. But then her eyes fell on a photo of her with her mother, taken before the illness. They were smiling, happy, with no idea of what the future held. At that moment, Sarah made her decision. With trembling hands, she took the contract and a pen. Closing her eyes for an instant, gathering all her courage, she signed her name on the dotted line. Tears streamed down her face as she put the contract back in the envelope. Sarah knew she was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. But for her mother's smile, for the chance of more moments together, she would make this sacrifice. With a heavy heart, Sarah picked up her phone and dialed Michael's number. When he answered, her voice came out low but firm. "Mr. Thompson, it's Sarah. I accept your proposal." On the other end of the line, there was a moment of silence before Michael responded. "I understand. Come to my office this afternoon. We'll finalize the details." When the call ended, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, feeling strangely empty. She had made her decision for better or worse. Now all that remained was to face the consequences. Looking out the window at the rising sun painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Sarah wondered what her life would be like from now on. What would happen after this night with Michael? How would she deal with the guilt, the shame, the regret? But then, the image of her mother smiling, healthy again, appeared in her mind. And Sarah knew that, no matter what happened, she would find the strength to move forward. For her mother, for her love, she would face any challenge that came her way. With a deep sigh, Sarah got up. She had a long day ahead, and an even longer night to wait for. But first, she would visit her mother in the hospital. She wanted to see Mrs. Barbara one last time before embarking on this journey of no return. She wanted to remember exactly why she was doing this, why she was willing to sacrifice so much. As she prepared to leave, Sarah couldn't imagine how this deal with Michael Thompson would change her life forever. She didn't know that this decision, made in a moment of desperation, would open doors to a future she could never have predicted. A future full of challenges, certainly, but also of unexpected possibilities. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple when Sarah arrived at Michael Thompson's imposing mansion. The driver he had sent opened the car door for her, and Sarah got out, feeling her legs tremble slightly under the black dress she had bought, especially for the occasion. The mansion was an impressive construction with modern lines and large glass windows that reflected the last lights of the day. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart before climbing the steps to the main entrance. Before she could ring the doorbell, the door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with a serious countenance. "Miss Sarah, I presume," she said. "I'm Helen, the housekeeper. Mr. Thompson is waiting for you. Please follow me." Sarah followed Helen through the luxurious interior of the mansion, her steps echoing on the marble floor. Expensive artwork adorned the walls, and elegant furniture filled the rooms. Everything exuded wealth and power, making Sarah feel even more out of place. Finally, they reached a spacious dining room. Michael was standing near a large window, a glass of wine in his hand. Upon seeing Sarah, he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah," he said, his deep voice filling the room, "you look stunning." "Thank you," she replied, her own voice barely above a whisper. Michael gestured towards the meticulously set table. "Please, have a seat. I thought we could have dinner first." Sarah nodded, grateful for the distraction. As she sat down, she noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. Michael joined her, and soon the dishes began to arrive, served by silent and efficient staff. Dinner proceeded in tense silence, broken only by occasional comments about the food or the wine. Sarah could barely swallow, her stomach a knot of anxiety. Michael, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, as if dinners with contracted women were a common occurrence for him. When dessert was served, Michael finally broke the uncomfortable silence. "Sarah," he began, his voice soft, "I know this situation is unusual. I want you to know that I deeply appreciate what you're doing." Sarah raised her eyes from her barely touched plate. "It's for my mother," she said simply. Michael nodded. "I understand, and I admire your dedication. But I want you to know that I don't intend to make this night unpleasant for you." Sarah felt a blush rise up her neck. I don't know what to expect, she admitted. Michael stood up, extending his hand to her. Come with me, he said softly. With her heart pounding, Sarah accepted his hand and followed him out of the dining room. They climbed an impressive staircase and walked down a hallway until they reached a set of dark wooden double doors. Michael opened the door, revealing a spacious and elegantly decorated bedroom. A large king-size bed dominated the center of the room, covered with silk sheets. Sarah felt her legs weaken. This was the moment she had both feared and known was inevitable. Michael must have noticed her hesitation, for he turned to her with an expression that Sarah couldn't decipher. Was it compassion or desire? Sarah, he said, his voice low and intense, we won't do anything you don't want to. The agreement is for us to spend the night together, but the terms of that intimacy are negotiable. She stared at him, surprised. But the contract, Michael shook his head. The contract says no restrictions, yes, but that doesn't mean I'm going to force you to do anything against your will. I'm willing to respect your limits. Sarah felt a wave of relief mixed with confusion. This wasn't the cold and calculating Michael she had expected. There was a gentleness in his eyes that caught her off guard. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael moved closer to her, gently touching her face. Because, Sarah, you intrigue me. Your strength, your dedication. There's something about you that awakens something in me that I thought had long been dead. Before Sarah could process his words, Michael leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, almost hesitant, so different from what she had imagined. Instinctively, she found herself responding, her hands finding their way to his chest. When the kiss ended, Sarah stepped back, breathless and confused. Part of her wanted to run, to escape this surreal situation, but another part, a part she barely recognized, wanted more. Michael was watching her closely, his dark eyes intense. We can stop at any time, he said. Just say the word. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her mother, of the treatment this would provide. When she opened them again, there was a renewed determination in her gaze. No, she said, her voice firmer than she expected. I want to continue. A slow smile spread across Michael's face. He pulled her closer, his hands sliding down her back. Then let me show you the pleasure I can give you, he murmured against her lips. What followed was a night of discovery for Sarah. Michael was an attentive and skilled lover, taking her to heights of pleasure she had never experienced before. Each touch, each kiss, each caress seemed to awaken new and intense sensations in her body. Hours passed, and Sarah found herself lost in a whirlwind of emotions and sensations. The cold and calculating Michael she had expected to meet was replaced by a passionate and gentle man, entirely focused on her pleasure. When they finally rested, the first rays of sun were beginning to filter through the curtains. Sarah was lying in Michael's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the rhythmic beating of his heart. Are you okay? Michael asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. Sarah nodded, unable to form words. She was exhausted but also strangely satisfied. The guilt she had expected to feel was absent, replaced by a confusion of emotions she could barely begin to unravel. Michael moved, reaching for something on the bedside table. When he returned, he had an envelope in his hands. This is for you, he said, handing it to her. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside were documents detailing her mother's treatment, everything already arranged and paid for. Tears began to form in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked. Michael pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. No, Sarah, I should be thanking you. This night was more than I could have hoped for. Sarah looked up at him, seeing a vulnerability in his gaze that surprised her. At that moment, she realized that something had changed. What had begun as a cold and calculated agreement had transformed into something more, something neither of them had foreseen. When Sarah finally left the mansion that morning, she knew her life would never be the same. Her mother's treatment was guaranteed, yes, but there was something more. An unexpected connection had formed between her and Michael, a connection she knew she couldn't ignore. As the driver took her back home, Sarah looked out the window, watching the city wake up. Her body was tired, but her mind was alert, filled with conflicting thoughts and emotions. What would happen now? How would she deal with the confusing feelings Michael had awakened in her? And how would this affect her life going forward? Sarah had no answers to these questions. But one thing she knew for certain: the night that should have been just a business arrangement had transformed into the beginning of something much more complex and potentially dangerous. Arriving home, Sarah threw herself on the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. Before falling asleep, her last thought was of her mother. Tomorrow she would go to the hospital with the good news about the treatment. But for now, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that the days to come would be full of challenges and discoveries. The morning sun flooded the room when Sarah finally woke up, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter she could hardly imagine where it would lead her. The days that followed the night with Michael were a whirlwind for Sarah. The first thing she did the next morning was rush to the hospital, eager to share the good news with her mother. When she arrived at Mrs. Barbara's room, she found the doctors already there discussing the new treatment plans. "Sarah, my daughter," exclaimed Mrs. Barbara, her eyes shining with renewed hope. "The doctors are saying I'll be able to have that experimental treatment. It's a miracle." Sarah forced a smile, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. "It is, Mum, a true miracle." Dr. Roberts, the doctor in charge of the case, approached Sarah with a smile on his face. "Miss Sarah, I don't know how you managed it, but this treatment is exactly what your mother needed. The chances of recovery have increased significantly." Sarah nodded, unable to find the right words. How could she explain what had really happened? How could she say that she had traded a night of her life for her mother's health? In the days that followed, Sarah divided herself between the hospital and her jobs. Despite Michael's financial help for the treatment, she still needed to work to keep up with the bills. However, her thoughts constantly returned to that night in the mansion. A week after the encounter, Sarah received an unexpected message from Michael. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? We need to talk." Sarah's heart raced. Part of her wanted to refuse, to bury that night in her memories and move on. But another part, a part she was reluctant to admit, longed to see Michael again. With trembling hands, she replied, "Okay. Where should we meet?" The response came almost instantly. "I'll send a car to pick you up at 8 p.m. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sarah could barely concentrate on work, her mind filled with scenarios about what Michael might want to discuss. When she got home to get ready, she was a bundle of nerves. At 8 p.m. sharp, a black limousine pulled up in front of her building. The driver escorted her to an elegant restaurant in the city center, a place Sarah would never dream of frequenting on her own. Michael was already waiting for her at a discreet table in the back of the restaurant. When he saw her, he stood up, a soft smile on his lips. "Sarah," he said, his deep voice sending shivers down her spine. "You look beautiful." Sarah blushed, sitting across from him. "Thank you for everything you did for my mother," she said, breaking the tense silence that followed. Michael shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. In fact, I should be the one thanking you." Sarah looked at him, confused. "Thanking me? Why?" Michael hesitated, something rare for a man usually so sure of himself. "Sarah, that night, it was more than I could have imagined. You awakened something in me that I thought had been dead for a long time." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I can't stop thinking about you," Michael admitted, his intense eyes fixed on hers. "I know our agreement was for just one night, but I'd like to see you again, outside the terms of any contract." Sarah felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. This wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. "Michael, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything now," he replied, reaching out to touch her hand on the table. "Just think about it. I'd like to get to know you better, Sarah, really." The dinner proceeded, the conversation flowing more easily than Sarah had expected. Michael proved to be an excellent listener, genuinely interested in her life, her dreams, her struggles. In turn, he shared stories of his own journey, revealing a more human and vulnerable side that Sarah hadn't imagined existed. When the night came to an end, Michael accompanied Sarah to the limousine. Before she got in, he turned to her, his eyes shining in the moonlight. "Sarah, I know this is complicated, that we started in an unconventional way, but I'd like to try something real with you. Would you give me that chance?" Sarah felt her heart race. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to dive headfirst into this unexpected possibility. But another part hesitated, reminding her of the circumstances that had initially united them. I need to think," she finally replied. "This is a lot to process, Michael." He nodded, understanding. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you decide." With one last look, Sarah got into the car, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself torn between the excitement of a possible relationship with Michael and the fear of the complications it could bring. She visited her mother in the hospital daily, seeing with joy Mrs. Barbara's progress under the new treatment. But each visit was also a reminder of the agreement she had made, of the line she had crossed. A week after the dinner, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Jessica, her best friend since childhood. "Sarah, where have you been? It's been weeks since I've seen you." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. With everything that was happening, she had isolated herself, avoiding contact even with her closest friendships. "I'm sorry, Jessica. Things have been complicated." "Complicated how? What's going on? Is it your mom?" Sarah hesitated. Could she trust Jessica? Could she tell the truth about Michael, about the agreement, about her confused feelings? "Jessica, I need to talk. Can we meet?" Hours later, Sarah was sitting in a cafe with Jessica, pouring out the whole story. She told her about Michael's proposal, the night at the mansion, her mother's treatment, and now the possibility of a real relationship. Jessica listened to everything in silence, her eyes widening more and more as the story unfolded. When Sarah finished, there was a moment of tense silence. "Sarah," Jessica began, her voice serious, "do you have any idea how dangerous this situation? Here's this man, he practically bought you." Sarah felt the words like a slap. "It wasn't like that, Jessica. He was gentle. And now, he wants something real." "Something real?" "Sarah, wake up. Men like him don't want something real. They want possession, control. You're putting yourself in a dangerous situation." Jessica's words echoed in Sarah's mind, planting seeds of doubt. Was she right? Was Sarah deluding herself, seeing something that didn't exist in Michael's kindness? That night, lying in her bed, Sarah found herself in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one side, the undeniable attraction she felt for Michael, the connection they had formed. On the other, Jessica's warnings, the constant reminder of how everything had begun. Her phone vibrated. A message from Michael. "Thinking of you, hope you're well." Sarah looked at the screen, her heart divided. What should she do? Follow her feelings and give Michael a chance? Or listen to Jessica's warnings and distance herself before it was too late? As sleep finally enveloped her, Sarah knew she was on the verge of a decision that would change the course of her life forever. Whatever she chose, there would be no turning back, and the consequences, for better or worse, would shape her future in ways she could barely imagine. The next day would bring new challenges, new revelations, and Sarah would have to find strength within herself to face whatever came next. Her journey, which had begun with a desperate agreement, was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The sun had barely risen when Sarah woke up, her mind still a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The words of Jessica echoed in her head, mixing with the memories of Michael's kindnesses. She got up, determined to find some clarity amidst the chaos of her emotions. She decided to visit her mother in the hospital before work. Perhaps seeing Mrs. Barbara, witnessing her improvement, would help put things into perspective. Arriving at the hospital room, Sarah found her mother sitting up in bed, a smile on her face, a sight that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. "Sarah, my dear," Mrs. Barbara exclaimed, her eyes shining. "Come, sit here. I have great news." Sarah approached, feeling a mixture of joy and apprehension. "What happened, Mum?" "Dr. Roberts came by earlier. He said the treatment is working better than expected. If everything continues like this, in a few weeks, I'll be able to go home." Sarah's heart filled with a joy that almost erased all her worries. Almost. "That's wonderful, Mom. I don't even know what to say." Mrs. Barbara took Sarah's hand, her eyes filling with tears. "Honey, I don't know how you managed to get this treatment, but thank you. You've given me a second chance at life." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. How could she explain the truth? How could she tell her mother what had really happened? "Mom, I would do anything for you," she finally said, the words laden with a meaning that Mrs. Barbara couldn't fully comprehend. Mrs. Barbara smiled, squeezing Sarah's hand. "I know, my dear, I know." After spending some time with her mother, Sarah left the hospital with a heavy heart. The joy of Mrs. Barbara's improvement was undeniable, but the weight of the secret she carried seemed more oppressive than ever. On her way to work, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Michael. "Good morning, Sarah. I hope you're well. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? I promise, no pressure, just a conversation." Sarah looked at the message, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, longed to see Michael again, but Jessica's warnings still echoed in her mind. After a few moments of hesitation, she replied, "Hello, Michael. Thank you for the invitation. Can I give you an answer later? I need to check a few things first." The response came almost instantly. "Of course, no problem. I'll be waiting." The day at work passed like a blur. Sarah found herself constantly lost in thought, weighing the pros and cons of accepting Michael's invitation. Around noon, she couldn't take it anymore and decided to call Jessica. "Hello, Sarah, is everything okay?" Jessica's worried voice sounded on the other end of the line. "More or less," Sarah replied, hesitant. "Jessica, Michael invited me to a dinner tonight." There was a moment of silence before Jessica responded. "And what are you going to do?" I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. What do you think I should do?" Jessica sighed. "Sarah, you know what I think about this situation. It's dangerous. But I also know that you're an adult woman capable of making your own decisions. If you really want to go, maybe it's better to face this head on." Sarah was surprised by the response. "You really think so?" "Look, I'm not saying I approve, but if you go, at least you can have a frank conversation with him, better understand what's going on. Just promise you'll be careful, okay?" "I promise," Sarah replied, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. After hanging up, Sarah sent a message to Michael accepting the dinner invitation. The response came quickly with details about the restaurant and time. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of anxiety and anticipation. When she finally got home to get ready, Sarah felt like she was about to enter a battle. At 8 p.m., she arrived at the restaurant. It was an elegant place, but not ostentatious, a choice that positively surprised her. Michael was already waiting for her at the entrance, dressed casually but impeccably as always. "Sarah," he said, his face lighting up when he saw her. "I'm glad you came." They were led to a discreet table at the back of the restaurant. After placing their orders, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "Sarah, I wanted to apologize." She looked at him, surprised. "Apologize? For what?" Michael sighed, running his hand through his hair in an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. "For how everything started between us. I know that the way we met, the agreement we made, it wasn't ideal. In fact, it was terrible of me to propose, something like that." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Then why did you do it?" "Honestly, because I was used to getting what I wanted through money and power. But you changed something in me, Sarah. That night it wasn't just about the agreement. It was about connection, about feeling something I hadn't felt in years." Sarah watched him carefully, looking for any sign of falsehood in his words. But all she saw was sincerity in his eyes. "Michael, I don't know what to say. All of this is so complicated." He reached out, gently touching her hand on the table. "I know, and I understand if you want to walk away, but if there's a chance, however small, for us to explore what's between us, I'd like to try." Sarah felt her heart race. The intensity in Michael's eyes, the sincerity in his voice, everything seemed real, but doubt still persisted. "What if it doesn't work out?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "What if this is just an illusion?" Michael gently squeezed her hand. "Then we'll have tried. Sarah, I'm not asking for eternal promises. I'm asking for a chance for us to really get to know each other without contracts, without agreements, just us." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a renewed determination in her gaze. "Okay," she finally said, "let's try, but on one condition." "Which one?" Michael asked, a mixture of relief and curiosity in his voice. "Let's start from scratch. Forget how we met, the agreement, everything. If this is real, it needs to be built on a new foundation." A slow smile spread across Michael's face. "I accept, in fact, I love the idea." He extended his hand as if it were a first date. "Hello, I'm Michael Thompson. It's a pleasure to meet you." Sarah couldn't help but smile as she shook his hand. "Sarah Evans, the pleasure is mine." The rest of the night flowed surprisingly naturally. They talked about their lives, their dreams, their struggles. Sarah spoke about her passion for nursing, about the challenge of caring for her mother. Michael shared stories of his difficult childhood, of how he built his business empire, and of how in the process he lost sight of what really mattered in life. When dinner came to an end, Sarah was surprised to realize that hours had passed. For the first time since she met Michael, she felt truly at ease in his presence. At the restaurant exit, Michael turned to her. "Sarah, thank you for tonight, for this second chance." She smiled, feeling a mixture of hope and caution. "Thank you, Michael, for being honest, for really wanting to try." He leaned in, hesitant, as if asking permission. Sarah closed the distance between them, allowing a soft kiss different from any other they had shared before. When they parted, both had a gleam in their eyes that spoke of possibilities and an uncertain future, but full of promises. "Good night, Sarah," Michael said softly. "Good night, Michael," she replied, getting into the taxi he had called for. Her. As the car drove away, Sarah looked out the window, her heart full of conflicting emotions. She knew she was entering unknown territory, that the challenges ahead would be many. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of genuine hope. The future was uncertain, but Sarah was determined to face it head-on. Whatever fate held in store for her and Michael, she was ready to find out. Arriving home, Sarah lay down. On the bed, her body exhausted, but her mind completely awake. She knew that tonight marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter full of possibilities, risks, discoveries. As sleep finally enveloped her, Sarah wondered what tomorrow would bring. But one thing she knew for sure. Her journey with Michael was just beginning, and she was determined to live it fully, with all the ups and downs that might come. The weeks that followed the decisive conversation with Michael were a whirlwind of changes for Sarah. She had decided to reduce her hours at the hospital and explore new opportunities that combined her passion for nursing with the desire to make a bigger difference. Michael, true to his word, had introduced Sarah to some community health initiatives supported by his company. One in particular caught her attention, a project to bring basic medical care to underprivileged communities on the outskirts of the city. On a Saturday morning, Sarah was preparing for her first visit to one of these communities. She was nervous, but also excited about the prospect of using her skills in a new and impactful way. "Are you sure you don't want me to go with you?" Michael asked, watching her pack her bag. Sarah smiled, touched by his concern. "Yes, I'm sure. I need to do this alone, at least this time, but thank you for offering." Before leaving, Sarah went to her mother's room to say goodbye. Mrs. Barbara was sitting in the armchair reading a book. Beside her, organizing some medications, was Martha, the nurse they had hired to help with daily care. "Are you leaving, dear?" Mrs. Barbara asked, a proud smile on her face. Sarah nodded, leaning down to kiss her mother's forehead. "Yes, I'm a little nervous, to be honest," "You'll do wonderfully well," Mrs. Barber assured. "Remember, you were born to care for people." With one last hug for her mother and a wave to Martha, Sarah left. The community Sarah was assigned to was about an hour away. As she drove, she reflected on how her life had changed in such a short time. From an overworked and desperate nurse, she now found herself in a position to really make a difference on a large scale. Upon arriving at the community, Sarah was greeted by Mrs. Rodriguez, a local community leader. The middle-aged woman had a warm smile that immediately made Sarah feel welcome. "Welcome, my dear," Mrs. Rodriguez said, hugging Sarah. "We're so grateful you've come. There's so much need here." Sarah spent the day getting to know the community, listening to the residents' stories and assessing their health needs. She saw children who had never been vaccinated, elderly people with untreated chronic diseases, pregnant women without adequate prenatal care. With each person she attended to, with each story she heard, Sarah felt her heart fill. This, she realized, was exactly what she was meant to do. As the day came to an end, Sarah found herself sitting with Mrs. Rodriguez, sharing a cup of coffee and discussing plans for future visits. "You know, Sarah," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes twinkling, "it's not often we see someone from the city who truly cares. Most come, take a look, and never return. But I can see in your eyes that you're different." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "This means a lot to me, Mrs. Rodriguez. I want to make a real difference here. And you will, my dear. You already have." On the drive back to the city, Sarah's mind was buzzing with ideas and plans. She couldn't wait to share her experience with Michael, to discuss how they could expand the project, reach more communities. When she arrived at Michael's apartment, that evening, he was waiting for her with dinner ready. As they ate, Sarah enthusiastically recounted her day, her eyes shining with passion and purpose. Michael listened intently, a soft smile on his face. When Sarah finally paused to take a breath, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with admiration, "I am so proud of you. You're truly making a difference." She squeezed his hand, feeling a wave of emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Michael. Your support, this opportunity, it's changed everything." They spent the rest of the evening discussing plans for the future. Michael offered to increase funding for the community health project, and they brainstormed ideas for expanding its reach. As Sarah lay in bed that night, Michael's arm draped protectively over her. She felt a sense of contentment she had never experienced before. Her life, which had seemed so desperate just months ago, was now full of purpose and possibility. She thought about her mother, whose health continued to improve. She thought about the community she had visited, and all the others waiting for help. And she thought about Michael, whose love and support had opened up a whole new world for her. The future, which had once seemed so bleak, now shone bright, with promise. Sarah knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time she felt truly equipped to face them. As she drifted off to sleep, a smile played on her lips. Tomorrow was a new day, full of opportunities to make a difference, and Sarah couldn't wait to embrace it. The following months brought a whirlwind of activity for Sarah. Her work with the Community Health Project expanded rapidly, thanks in large part to Michael's increased funding and support. She found herself visiting multiple communities each week, coordinating with local leaders, and even training other healthcare workers to join the initiative. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah was preparing for a particularly important day. She was scheduled to present the results of their community health initiative to the board of Michael's company. It was a crucial meeting that could determine the future funding and expansion of the project. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer nervously, she felt Michael's arms wrap around her from behind. "You're going to do great," he murmured, placing a soft kiss on her neck. "They're going to love you." Sarah turned in his arms, facing him with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "I hope so. This means so much to me, to us." Michael smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know. And that passion is exactly why they'll support this project. Just be yourself, Sarah. That's more than enough." With a deep breath and a final look in the mirror, Sarah headed out. The drive to Michael's company headquarters was filled with mental rehearsals of her presentation and deep breathing exercises to calm her nerves. As she walked into the imposing building, Sarah couldn't help but remember the first time she had come here, desperate and scared. How different things were now. The boardroom was intimidating, filled with serious-faced executives in expensive suits. Michael, already seated at the head of the table, gave her an encouraging nod as she set up her presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for this opportunity. Today I'm here to share with you the incredible impact of our community health initiative." As she delved into the presentation, showing statistics, sharing stories, and outlining future plans, Sarah felt her nervousness melt away. This was her passion, her purpose, and it showed in every word she spoke. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, to her surprise, applause broke out. The board members looked genuinely impressed, and several began asking enthusiastic questions about expansion possibilities and long-term goals. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a wave of relief and excitement wash over her. She had done it. The project would not only continue but expand significantly. Michael approached her as the room cleared out, his face beaming with pride. "You were amazing," he said, squeezing her hand discreetly. They loved every minute of it. Sarah couldn't contain her smile. "I can't believe it went so well. This means we can help so many more people." As they left the building together, Michael suggested celebrating over lunch. They found a quiet cafe nearby, and as they sat down, Sarah noticed Michael seemed slightly nervous. "Is everything okay?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. Michael took a deep breath, reaching across the table to take her hands in his. "Sarah, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Sarah's heart began to race. "What is it?" "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Seeing you today, watching you light up that room with your passion and dedication, it just confirmed what I've known for a while now." He paused, his eyes locked on hers. "Sarah, will you move in with me?" For a moment, Sarah was speechless. It was a big step, one that would fundamentally change their relationship. But as she looked into Michael's eyes, filled with love and hope, she knew her answer. "Yes," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I'd love to move in with you." Michael's face lit up with joy. He leaned across the table, capturing her lips in a tender kiss. When they parted, both were grinning like teenagers. As they enjoyed their celebratory lunch, they began excitedly discussing plans for their shared future. Sarah thought about how she would tell her mother, how they would merge their lives, and all the new adventures that lay ahead. That evening, as they shared the news with Mrs. Barbara over dinner, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. Her mother's health was steadily improving, her career was flourishing in ways she had never imagined, and her relationship with Michael was growing stronger every day. As she lay in bed that night, Michael's arm draped protectively over her, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From that desperate night when she had agreed to Michael's proposal, to now planning a future together. It seemed almost unbelievable. She knew there would still be challenges ahead. Moving in together would bring its own set of adjustments, and balancing her expanding career with her personal life would require effort. But for the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly equipped to handle whatever came her way. With a contented sigh, she snuggled closer to Michael, feeling grateful for the twists of fate that had led her here. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah looked forward to the future with hope and excitement, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life with open arms. The following weeks were a flurry of activity as Sarah prepared to move in with Michael. Between organizing her belongings, coordinating with movers, and spending time with her mother to ensure she was comfortable with the change, Sarah barely had a moment to catch her breath. On the day of the move, Sarah stood in her small apartment looking around at the boxes that contained her life. It felt surreal to be leaving this place that had been her sanctuary for so long. "Are you ready?" Michael asked softly, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Sarah leaned back into his embrace, taking a deep breath. "I think so. It's just A lot of memories here, you know? Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know, but we're going to make new memories together, better ones. As they carried the last of the boxes to the moving truck, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was a big step, one that would change everything. The drive to Michael's, now their penthouse, was filled with comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts about the future they were building together. When they arrived, Michael insisted on carrying Sarah over the threshold, much to her amusement and embarrassment. "Welcome home," he said, setting her down. In the spacious living room, Sarah looked around, taking in the familiar space that was now hers too. "Home," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. It felt right. The next few days were a whirlwind of unpacking, rearranging, and settling in. There were moments of frustration, like when they couldn't agree on where to put the couch, or when Sarah realized she had forgotten to pack her favorite mug. But there were also moments of pure joy, like when they cooked their first meal together in their shared kitchen, or when they fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from unpacking, but happy to be together. About a week after moving in, Sarah was organizing her clothes in their shared walk-in closet when she came across a small velvet box tucked away in one of Michael's drawers. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized what it might be. For a moment, she was tempted to open it, but she quickly pushed the thought away. If it was what she thought it was, Michael would share it with her when he was ready. That evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the sunset over the city, Sarah couldn't help but think about the box. She looked at Michael, who was absent-mindedly running his fingers through her hair, and felt a wave of love wash over her. "Michael," she said softly, causing him to look at her, "I'm really happy." A smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes in a way that made Sarah's heart flutter. "Me too, Sarah, more than I ever thought possible." As they sat there wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah realized that this moment, this feeling, was what she had been searching for all her life. It wasn't about the fancy apartment or the successful career. It was about finding someone who supported her dreams, who loved her unconditionally, and who made her want to be the best version of herself. The next few months were a period of adjustment and growth for Sarah and Michael. Living together brought its own set of challenges, but it also deepened their connection in ways they hadn't anticipated. Sarah continued to throw herself into her work with the Community Health Initiative. The project was expanding rapidly, reaching more underserved areas and making a significant impact on people's lives. She often came home exhausted but fulfilled, eager to share the day's successes and challenges with Michael. One evening, as they were preparing dinner together, a routine they had come to cherish, Michael brought up a topic that caught Sarah off guard. "So I've been thinking," he began, his tone casual as he chopped vegetables. "What would you think about taking a trip together? Maybe somewhere tropical?" Sarah paused in her task of stirring the sauce, looking at him with surprise. "A trip? That sounds wonderful, but what about work and my mom?" Michael set down his knife, turning to face her. "I think we both could use a break. You've been working non-stop with the initiative, and I've got some big deals coming up. It might be good to recharge before diving back in." Sarah bit her lip, considering. The idea was tempting, but she couldn't help feeling a twinge of guilt at the thought of leaving her responsibilities behind, even for a short while. Sensing her hesitation, Michael continued, "We could ask Jessica to check in on your mom while we're gone. And the project team is more than capable of handling things for a week or two. You've trained them well." Sarah smiled at the compliment. It was true, her team had grown impressively over the past months. "Okay," she said finally, a spark of excitement igniting in her chest. "Let's do it. Where did you have in mind?" Michael's face lit up. "How about Bali? I've heard it's beautiful this time of year." And so, 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself stepping off a plane onto the lush tropical island of Bali. The air was warm and fragrant, filled with the scent of flowers and the salty tang of the ocean. Their villa was a secluded paradise, nestled among palm trees with a breathtaking view of the Indian Ocean. As they settled in, Sarah felt the stress of the past months begin to melt away. The days that followed were filled with adventures and relaxation. They explored ancient temples, hiked through verdant rice terraces, and spent lazy afternoons on pristine beaches. In the evenings, they would watch the sunset from their private balcony, talking about everything and nothing. It was on one such evening, about halfway through their trip, that Michael seemed particularly nervous. He kept fidgeting with something in his pocket, and his responses to Sarah's conversation were distracted. "Michael," Sarah said finally, placing her hand on his arm. "Is everything okay? You seem off." Michael took a deep breath, turning to face her fully. "Sarah, there's something I want to ask you." Sarah's heart began to race as Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the same one she had glimpsed in their closet months ago. "Sarah Evans," Michael began, his voice filled with emotion as he got down on one knee. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what it means to truly love someone, to put their needs before your own. You've made me a better man, a better person. I can't imagine spending a single day without you by my side." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, Sarah was speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Michael, the man who had changed her life in so many ways. She thought about their journey, how it had begun with a desperate agreement and transformed into something beautiful and real. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you." Michael's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He stood, pulling her into a passionate kiss as the Bali sunset painted the sky in hues of pink and gold. As they broke apart, both laughing and crying, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. This was it. This was the love she had always dreamed of but never truly believed she would find. The rest of their trip passed in a blissful haze. They celebrated their engagement with a romantic dinner on the beach, toes in the sand and candlelight flickering in the balmy evening air. They talked about their future, making plans and dreaming big. When they returned home, they were greeted with an outpouring of love and support from friends and family. Mrs. Barbara was overjoyed, tears in her eyes as she hugged them both. "I always knew you two were meant for each other," she said, her voice filled with emotion. As the excitement of their engagement settled into a warm glow of happiness, Sarah and Michael threw themselves back into their work with renewed energy. The Community Health Initiative continued to grow and thrive under Sarah's leadership, while Michael's business ventures flourished. They began to plan their wedding, deciding on a small, intimate ceremony with just their closest friends and family. Sarah found herself getting caught up in the details, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, trying on dresses. It was a world away from where she had been just a year ago, struggling to make ends meet and desperate to help her mother. One afternoon, as Sarah was leafing through a bridal magazine, she was struck by a sudden realization. She set the magazine down and went to find Michael, who was working in his home office. "Michael," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "I've been thinking." He looked up from his computer, giving her his full attention. "What about love?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I want to start a foundation, something that can continue and expand the work we've been doing with the Community Health Initiative. I want to make a lasting difference." Michael's face broke into a proud smile. "Sarah, that's a wonderful idea. I think you'd be amazing at it." And so, alongside their wedding preparations, Sarah began the process of establishing the Evans-Thompson Foundation for Community Health. It was challenging work, requiring long hours and a steep learning curve, but Sarah threw herself into it with characteristic determination. As their wedding day approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. From that night in the restaurant when she had first met Michael, to the desperate agreement that had started it all, to the love that had blossomed between them, it seemed almost unbelievable. The night before their wedding, Sarah stood on the balcony of their penthouse looking out over the city. Michael joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Penny, for your thoughts," he murmured, resting his chin on her shoulder. Sarah leaned back into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, how different things were a year ago. If someone had told me then that I'd be here now, about to marry you, starting a foundation, I never would have believed them. Michael tightened his arms around her. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? I thank my lucky stars every day that I spilled those drinks on myself that night. Sarah laughed, turning in his arms to face him. Who would have thought that a clumsy waitress and an arrogant CEO would end up here? Hey, I wasn't arrogant, Michael protested with a grin. Just confident. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Uh-huh, sure. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. Tomorrow they would start a new chapter of their lives together. There would be challenges ahead, she knew, but with Michael by her side, she felt ready to face anything. I love you, she whispered, looking into his eyes. I love you too, Michael replied, leaning in to kiss her softly. As the city lights twinkled around them, Sarah and Michael stood on the threshold of their future, hearts full of love and hope. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. It was hard-won, and it was theirs. Tomorrow would bring a new adventure, a new beginning. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring morning. Sarah woke early, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. As she sat at the vanity in the bridal suite, her best friend Jessica fussing with her hair, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was a far cry from the desperate, overworked nurse she had been just over a year ago. You look beautiful, Jessica said, placing the final pin in Sarah's updo. Michael is going to be speechless. Sarah smiled, touching the delicate pearl necklace at her throat, a gift from Mrs. Barbara. I can't believe this is really happening, she murmured. There was a soft knock at the door and Mrs. Barbara entered, her eyes filling with tears as she saw her daughter. Oh, Sarah, she breathed. You look absolutely radiant. As Sarah stood to hug her mother, she was struck by how much healthier Mrs. Barbara looked. The experimental treatment had worked wonders, and while she wasn't completely out of the woods, she was stronger and more vibrant than she had been in years. Are you ready, sweetheart? Mrs. Barbara asked, holding Sarah at arm's length. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress. I am, she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The ceremony was everything Sarah and Michael had dreamed of, intimate, heartfelt, and filled with love. As Sarah walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, her eyes locked with Michael's. The love she saw reflected there took her breath away. Their vows were personal and touching, bringing tears to the eyes of their guests. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, the joy that radiated from the couple was palpable. The reception was a joyous celebration, filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. As Sarah and Michael swayed together, during their first dance, she leaned her head on his shoulder, overwhelmed by the perfection of the moment. Happy Mrs. Thompson, Michael murmured in her ear. Sarah lifted her head, meeting his gaze with a radiant smile. Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Thompson. As the night wore on, Sarah found a quiet moment to slip away to the balcony for some fresh air. She was soon joined by Jessica, who handed her a glass of champagne. Some party, huh? Jessica said, leaning against the railing beside her friend. Sarah nodded, taking a sip of her champagne. It's perfect. I still can't quite believe it's real. Jessica was quiet for a moment, then turned to face Sarah fully. You know, I have to admit something. When you first told me about Michael, about how you two met, I was scared for you. I thought he was taking advantage of you. Sarah felt a twinge in her chest, remembering those early days and the turmoil she had felt. I know. I was scared, too, at first. But seeing you two together, Jessica continued, seeing how he looks at you, how he supports you, I've never been happier to be wrong about something. You two really are perfect for each other. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she pulled Jessica into a tight hug. Thank you, she whispered. Your support has meant everything to me. As they rejoined the party, Sarah felt a renewed sense of gratitude wash over her. She had so much to be thankful for. Her health, her mother's recovery, her flourishing career, and now her marriage to a man who loved and supported her unconditionally. The next morning, As Sarah and Michael prepared to leave for their honeymoon, there was one last surprise. Michael handed Sarah an envelope with a mysterious smile. "What's this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it," he urged. Inside, Sarah found documents detailing a significant donation made in their names to the Evans-Thompson Foundation for Community Health. The amount was enough to fund several new initiatives and expand their reach even further. Sarah looked up at Michael, her eyes shining with tears. "Michael, I don't know what to say." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You don't have to say anything. I know how much this work means to you, and I want to support it in every way I can. This is just the beginning." As they boarded their flight hand in hand, Sarah felt a sense of excitement for the future that lay ahead. She and Michael had overcome so much to get to this point, and she knew that together they could face anything life threw their way. Their love story may have had an unconventional beginning, but it had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. As the plane took off, carrying them towards their new life together, Sarah smiled to herself. This wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning, full of promise and possibility, and she couldn't wait to see what the future held.